Hello, good evening. I'm Jackie Kemp. I'm a journalist and content writer, and I'm here to discuss this evening's news with our guest, Maureen Watt. Maureen is a retired minister from the Scottish Government and retired MSP for Aberdeen South and Kincardine. Good evening, Maureen.
Good evening,
Um,
Jackie. How are you in this freezing cold weather?
um,
Keeping warm, I
Good,
hope.
but we'll return to the weather in a moment. I'm just going to, before we start discussing the news, I'm going to update you on what's happening in the Ukraine as we do every night. And this is day 294. The Ukrainian military has said it shot down 13 Iranian-made drones over Kyiv and the surrounding region following Russia's first major drone attack on the capital in weeks. Authorities described the assault early on Wednesday as a continuation of Russia's energy terror against the country. Wednesday's Russian drone strikes damaged 5 buildings in Kyiv, though air defences thwarted many more. Russian forces fired multiple rocket launchers that hit the regional administration building in Kherson. Russian drone strikes on Kiev and the region around the Ukrainian capital on Wednesday didn't damage any energy facilities or the national power grid operator said. The Russian assault on Wednesday morning came as the US was expected to decide whether to supply Ukraine with its advanced Patriot air defense system. US officials told CNN that the missiles could be delivered in a matter of days after the repeated Russian barrages against Ukrainian cities. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia hadn't received any proposals about a Christmas ceasefire in Ukraine, adding that topic was not on the agenda. Nearly 7 million children in Ukraine, or almost every child in the country, have been put at risk as a result of the continued attacks. They discovered the Ukrainian investigators discovered apparently a torture chamber in Kherson. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Europe to support a war tribunal. And Germany has actually now taken 1 million Syrian refugees. No, oh, sorry, 1 million Ukrainian refugees, which is a big number, much bigger than any other European country, and a lot bigger than what the UK has managed. Although Scotland's done a lot. So that's the situation in the Ukraine, and then our first story that we're going to discuss tonight is the dreadful news about a small boat bringing 43 refugees across the channel that got into distress, and 4 people have died, and dozens more have been pulled out of the water. 43 people were rescued, 30 were pulled out of the water. And then on that same day, MPs voted this afternoon by 188 votes to 69 to defeat Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis' private bill, and that was to override the European Court of Human Rights rulings on asylum policy. He wanted to make it easier to take refugees to Rwanda, and he proposed this 10-minute rule bill, and the SNP actually unusually opposed it. Alison Thulis gave a powerful speech in that debate, which lots of people have been sharing on Twitter, and she said it was offensive to bring this bill forward today when people have died crossing the channel. So, what do you think about this situation, Maureen?
Well, it is absolutely tragic. Normally, we see a decline in the number of people crossing the channel in the winter, in the autumn and winter, in the bad weather, and clearly the weather has been getting very bad recently, and it's absolutely horrific that the people traffickers are still trying to get people across at this time of year when it is so dangerous. And, it's cold here on land, never mind what it must be like in the water. It's absolute cruelty and despicable, just in the worst sense. And every effort that the UK government seems to take to try and stem the flow of migrants just doesn't seem to be working. I mean, they've even poured millions into the French government to try and get it stopped, and also to try and have UK people across there. It's extremely difficult to try and stop this while, just the whole policy is wrong. It's not been working for years and years now, and needs to be changed completely so that migrants are allowed to come to the UK and be what by safe means and be um, processed thereafter. But that's
Yes.
not what this Tory government wants to do. It's just wants to keep the migrants as a policy that they think
Yeah.
is very very liked by the right wing, if you like.
Well, they're kind of creating the sort of funnel, aren't they? I mean, I was
Mhm.
quite appalled to see that some of the people in that boat were from Afghanistan. You know, Afghanistan is collapsing, people are starving to death, and, you know, presumably some families send out, you know, young men, or they may even have been people who worked for the British military, and they've struggled their way across
Mhm.
Europe, and presumably they want to come to Britain because they may have even have worked, as I say, for the British military, but there's no way for them to get here. They were abandoned in the fall of Kabul, you know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, the situation in Afghanistan is dire, and as you say, they could well be people who should have been able to come here legally because they helped the British military while British troops were in Afghanistan. And to think that people were abandoned, just abandoned. I mean, we're talking about interpreters, people who worked in the camps and whatever, and that fact that they were just abandoned by the UK. I mean, it's little wonder that our standing in the world just diminishes and diminishes, and where that's going to
yeah.
end, you just wonder when we stoking up so many enemies. UK government is stoking up so many enemies abroad.
Yes, I mean, and you know, what happened in Afghanistan, just to focus on that, you know, they've been abandoned by the whole sort of West, and there's no, you know, the aid, the money that they need to kind of keep people fed isn't coming in. So people are selling their daughters, they're selling kidneys, and presumably, you know, these young men that they send out, they're responsible for trying to save their families from death by starvation. That's one of the reasons that they're so desperate, you know, to get here, because it's not just their own lives that they're fighting for; it's their whole family. And you know, it's so
Yeah,
tragic that this
yeah.
period.
And you need to put it into perspective because you said earlier, giving the Ukrainian update, that Germany had taken 1 million refugees from Ukraine. I mean, they also, that's on top of the refugees that they take from other countries. And speaking to UK government ministers, you would think we were taking most of the refugees from across the world, which is simply not the case. And I haven't seen a bar chart recently about how many refugees different countries have taken, but I'm sure the UK is not going to be anywhere near the top. The idea that everybody crosses every other country just to come to the UK because it's a great country to come to is not the case. Most of the people who want to come here have probably got relatives or friends or someone who can vouch for them already here. And that's what makes it even more tragic, I think.
It is. I'm 40,000. You know, the narrative is very. You know, there's not much context. Like I was listening to Chris Mason from the BBC interviewing Rishi Sunak on the news yesterday, and his first question was, Prime Minister, why do so many people want to come here? Is it because we're a soft touch? That's the first question that he asked, and it's like
Yeah.
we're talking 40,000. That's nothing. You know,
Soft touch question from the BBC, yeah, the
it
mainstream
was absolutely.
Westminster media, yeah, yeah.
It was like someone from the Sun would have asked 10 years ago. It's like, you know, Chris Mason from the Sun. It was like, I mean, I think the narrative is just, it's just not right. It's just 40. You know, you can just see that the numbers. If you look at that, even the numbers of people who actually migrate, immigrate, and emigrate from the UK are, you know, are in the hundreds of thousands. So 40,000 isn't very many, but of course it's a huge news story because of the way that they're traveling. But if you brought those 40,000 people over by, you know, in normal means of transport, it wouldn't really, it wouldn't cause the same news value, you know,
I know,
just
but
brought them
you
over.
know, they keep saying that the number of people coming to the UK, and I'm not just talking about refugees here, is still on the up. But yet we're still got a shortage of labour. So their whole immigration policy is shot to bits. And you just wonder how on earth they're going to be able to rescue that. It's I don't think it's possible. And there's no
Yeah,
real hope any either in the what the Labour Party is saying, because they seem to be going for the same demographic in terms of
I know.
saying migrants are what we don't need, whereas more and more people are seeing that things aren't happening and services aren't happening because of a shortage of labour. So, um, but what bothers me is how so many seem to be coming with through gangmasters and illegally, and you just wonder, even out with the camps, what sort of conditions they're being kept in. It's just doesn't bear thinking
Yeah,
about.
I know. It's a kind of it's a knotty problem because it's interesting to see that the figures show that the net migration, which is the number of people that have come in minus the people that have gone out, that the gap is quite big, and I'm just wondering if that kind of Brexit effect might be affecting the fact that it's much harder for people to go anywhere. There's nowhere that it's not very easy to move anywhere now, is it, to work or for our young people if they if they wanted to go, they could have gone and I don't know worked on farms or something in Europe or
Mm.
things like that. But it's not easy now. So the only place they can really go is Australia. Like my kids' friends, if they want to explore the world, they get a yes from Australia in minutes because they're desperate for young people. But I don't know if that's to do with it, the fact that maybe there are fewer people leaving because it's harder to leave. I don't know,
Yes, and
but
even people who are want to. Sorry, you want to move on?
no, no, go ahead. You can wrap that up, and I'll just get to the
No, I
next
was
story.
just going to say, even people who might have retired to sunnier climes, thinking twice about it because we're no longer in the EU, and perhaps worried about getting their pensions and benefits,
That is very
which they would
true.
have
Yeah,
normally got here
really,
in Spain and Portugal and sunnier climes. Yeah.
very true. Okay. And that moves us on to the next story, which is that's just the division, I think, on the Opposition Day debate. Is that right? The SNP put forward plans today to introduce a bill to allow the Scottish Parliament to hold a referendum on independence. They used their Opposition Day debate on Scotland's future to bring forward a motion to amend the Scotland Act so that they could hold a referendum. Um, and, that gave them an opportunity to address the issue and hold some kind of debate. But it's no surprise that that it was a huge. I'm surprised that there were so many people who showed up for the debate. Did you say it was 265? That was just about surprised. Labour abstained. Did Labour abstain? Interesting. Well, we'll find out about that tomorrow. I suppose it's just happened, but oh, the only thing okay, Linda's was telling me that it was 265 against and 45 for. So obviously quite 40 42 for or 42 for. So obviously quite a lot of MPs showed up to go through division lobbies to vote against this amendment to the Scotland Act. Um, but the benches were bare during the debate, so they didn't show up for the debate. They just were called down to vote again it. What do you think about that, Maureen?
Well, I'm glad that we had the Opposition Day debate so soon after the Supreme Court ruling. I think that was a good idea to go on the democratic deficit that faces Scotland at the moment. If the Supreme Court ruled against, as they did, that Scotland cannot hold a referendum itself, just where do we go from here? I didn't listen to the debate, but um, it would seem that at the at, at the moment that there is no way for Scotland to go. So I'm glad that the SNP are having a conference in March where we can reaffirm that if we're not being allowed to hold a referendum, that we go for a majority of MPs. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when that was the policy. I stood for Parliament for Westminster in 1979, and there, at that point, we never ever thought in our wildest dreams that we'd be in a situation where we would get a majority, and we've had a majority in Westminster of the Scottish MPs since 2015. So is how many? Is that four elections? Three or four elections? So on the fifth one, um, it just hopefully will reaffirm the fact that the Scottish National Party is the party, and its policies are what the people of Scotland want. It's not just at Westminster that we're winning a majority, we're winning majority of independents members in the Scottish Parliament, and even in our councils, we have more SNP councillors than any other party. So if that's not a majority for an independence party, I don't know what is. So I think we need to revert to the policy of getting a majority of SNP MPs in Westminster and start negotiations, start unpicking the Westminster's powers in Scotland, um, and um, and have an independence prospectus program, and maybe then put that, once it's decided and agreed on with Westminster, to to the Scottish electorate in a referendum that the Scottish government call. And I think it's important that we keep up our international relations in this regard, because I think we may have to um, call on the international community to back Scotland's right to self-determination.
That's amazing that you were first elected in 1979. I mean, the sort of trend, if you work for a business, you sort of tend to draw trends. And, as you say, in 1979, the support for independence, I looked this up the other day, was 14%. That's when Ipsos Mori started polling. And then the kind of trend goes gradually up and up and up. And then it ticked up during COVID to over 50%. And then it's taken another, I think 56% was the highest that we've had in these four recent polls. But, I think if you were in a business context, you would start planning for an independent Scotland, and I imagine that there are people in businesses across the UK and probably people in politics who are kind of seeing that it's important for them to start confronting the reality that Scotland is going to become independent. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's a kind of
and I think that's why
it's
it's really good
isn't
that the First Minister has appointed Ian Blackford to engage with business in the future. Now that he's no longer leader in Westminster, he's an ideal person to do it, coming from a business background himself in finance, and finance being important to Edinburgh and the wider Scotland. So um, it's really good that we're really focusing on this, and getting
yeah,
business to think
yeah,
about it,
it's
because not all business is against us. We have a very good business organisation in Business for Scotland who engage with business all the time, and it's growing in its membership. So um, the idea that all business is against independence is not the case.
No, and I think it's about kind of skating to where the puck is going, not to where it is. I think business people are used to dealing with political change and market change and thinking about what the opportunities are. So I think that's interesting, and I also think it's interesting that we've got this new young team in Westminster who are going to uh, get their heads and do things in a different way. Do you think that they've done well with this debate?
Well, as I say, I haven't listened to it, but I've heard that there have been some cracking speeches. So the I think the idea that because we lost the argument in the Supreme Court that we're just going to lie down or go away or lick our wounds has been proven the exact opposite. Opposite. The people in the party that
Mm.
I speak to are really ready to take things to the next level and determined to
Yeah,
succeed. This is not a setback. This is a real push, a real shove for us
yeah.
to get up and at them again, up and at them again, if you
Well,
like.
it's interesting that both the new Westminster leaders are part of this generation of under 35s who are extremely pro independence. The numbers are suggest that their numbers in that generation are well over 60% in favor of independence. So
Absolutely.
as
I mean, it's
happens,
only my generation that are not. So, in that sense, it's a bit like Northern Ireland, isn't it? That the majority, um, are likely to be more pro a united Ireland than not. Although it's not a direct correlation, but I just think that things are definite. If every other than over the 65s are in favour of independence, there's something definitely happening in the younger generations of today.
yeah. Well, we'll watch this space, eh?
Yeah,
So, and our next story is about the Shetland power outage. More than 100 engineers are being sent to Shetland after heavy snowstorms cut power to thousands of homes, many of which face being without electricity until the end of the week. A major incident has been declared, with householders urged to remain at home after heavy loads of ice and snow brought down electricity lines. With 2,800 homes still without power, SSEN said 15 emergency crews arrived by ferry in Lerwick early on Wednesday morning, and emergency generators are being used in some places. Um, and the power company said other crews are arriving from mainland Scotland and Orkney during the day by plane, ferry, helicopter. Um, so it's been a very big weather event, the worst since 1995. And the crime writer Anne Cleese issued an appeal for help after losing a laptop in the storm containing half of her new novel, which is obviously a concern for people who like Anne Cleeve's work. And Tom Morton, who lives on Shetland, tweeted a picture of his Rayburn and his analog radio because he's like many Shetlanders probably quite well prepared for power cuts.
yes, I suspect that a lot of them have wood burning stoves, which is a godsend in weather like that. But we were affected. Our power was out with Storm Irwin just in November last year, and for to be 7 days without power, that's pretty grim. But the Shetlanders are hardy folk, and I mean you can see the ice forming here. It was really difficult. Um, Quite a lot of snow to get out of our drive today. So I dread to think what the Shetlanders are like. But as you say, they're hardy folk, and Anne Cleves will just have to wait till I thaw till she finds her laptop, probably.
I
But yeah,
suppose she doesn't use keep it on the cloud, but anyway, yeah, I'm snowed in right now. I'm in the Northwest Highlands, and we were actually snowed in. So, but we still got power, so we're fine really. We've got wood burning stoves, we've got power, and we're just working our way through the store cupboards. All the sort of
yeah.
things that summer visitors bring that you never normally eat. I just find we have 4 open jars of peanut butter. So I'm trying to think what I can do with all these open jars of peanut butter.
And
Nut
candles are
roast or
always
something.
to the ready. Candles are always to the ready too, aren't they?
Yeah. So well, let's hope that the people in Shetland get their power back soon, because as you say, as the time goes on, it's 7 days must have been tough for
Mm.
you and last time that happened. Um,
Yeah, we weren't 7 days, but I'm saying it's some of the Shetlanders are going to be 7 days, which for them is going to be tough, I think.
yeah, no, I think it will be. But yeah, they've got warm banks and things opening up, but I suppose you don't want to travel as well in this weather. So then we are about inflation. UK inflation has eased to 10.7%. UK inflation declined at the sharpest rate in 16 months to 10.7% in November, as the momentum behind the rising cost of clothing and petrol began to ease amid growing fears of a long recession. The drop in the consumer prices index figure was slightly bigger than expected by most city analysts, who forecast the annual rate of price rises would slide to 10.9%. However, prices were still rising, albeit at a slower rate. Um, I think food, for instance, food is going up faster than that. Petrol is a big cause of the fall in inflation, but I think in the
Mm.
UK, food inflation is about the highest in Europe. It's about 16%, which is partly because of Brexit. It's partly because we're producing less food, and it's partly because it's harder and more expensive to import food, and it's also because sterling has gone down, and that makes imports more expensive. Um, so this
Yeah,
is some
Brexit.
good news, but really it's worrying.
Yes, you can definitely see petrol and diesel fuel prices going down, and competition, I think, coming back into the market between different fuel stations here. Um, but it's food, it's essentials that are still um, rising, and as you say, things like um, stuff, sterling not being able to buy as much, and Brexit that should never be mentioned, having a real effect in terms of our output of food. Um, so uh, we
What did you
just
say?
have to
Sorry,
we just have to wait and see. Yeah,
Linda?
crops being left in the field, especially our soft fruit, because there was nobody there to pick them. Um, but the way that Westminster is going in terms of trade deals or lack of trade deals, and markets not being open to replace the EU market, is meaning that farmers are having to take tough decisions of not growing as much as they would have previously, whereas you would think post Brexit that we should be increasing production. Um, just shows you how screwed things have become as a result of Brexit. And the UK government is not showing any direction for our farmers. And they've
I think
also contend with huge input costs in terms of fertilizer and stuff being much more difficult um, to get hold of, and also at huge costs.
yes, the costs have gone up a lot, and the sort of the subsidy for farmers that the Common Agricultural Policy provides, that there's not that stability or that certainty, and I think essentially that means that more of the cost of food is going to be borne by the people who pay for it in the shops rather than the taxpayer. That's what's going to happen under this government. I think that's in America. We used to live in America. In America, one tomato is $2. You can buy two burgers for that, two $1 burgers for the same price as one tomato, because they just don't believe that food should be paid. The production of food should be paid for by the taxpayer. It's a sort of
Mm.
ideological thing. Um, so yeah, Brexit's definitely part of that whole equation. Must be very difficult for farmers. You probably have a lot of farmers in your area.
Yeah, and I come from a farming background myself, and my son works for NFU in England. So, yeah, I hear about it all the time. So it is very difficult, and farmers are very hardy folk and very optimistic folk, and find markets for their produce. But the thing that really bothers me, Jackie, is that Scotland has gone for a reputation of quality produce, and not as in the United States, where they don't give a damn about the health and safety of their products, and you can get food poisoning really easily in the United States from their food, any kinds of food. So on the other, whereas we have gone for food safety and food quality, and if you think about the knock-on effect that has in terms of people not pitching up at A&E or in hospital or to their GPs because they have got salmonella poisoning or something. You know, people don't think about the other effects that going for quality and going for good healthy produce and producing food in a sustainable healthy way has a knock on effects on other parts of our economy. So Um, I think we're doing it right here. But these kind of knock on consequentials are not often talked about or debated, are they?
They're not. I think the Scottish government's just set up a food commission. So I hope that they will be able to kind of consider, how to help people get access to nutritious food, and the food supply chains, which are quite fragile because Scotland's at the end of all the supply chains, and we saw that food coming from Europe, because we get 40% of our fresh fruit and vegetables or something from Europe,
Mm,
and we saw that when they took away cabotage for the European drivers and the supply chains broke down, that it was Scotland where you see the break, because they break at the ends, right? So there are a lot of food issues that an independent Scotland will need to consider.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so then, we're just going to move on to the next story, which is um, about Germany backing Bosnia to join the EU. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said it's in the interest of Germany and Europe for the remaining Balkan states to become EU members, and welcomed the decision to grant Bosnia candidate status. It's in our German and our European interest for the rest of the Balkans to become part of the European Union, Scholz told MPs in an address at the Bundestag. Supporters of the EU's eastward expansion argue that the bloc's engagement with the Western Balkans is vital for protecting European security in the face of Russian aggression. On Tuesday, diplomats in Brussels agreed to accept Bosnia as a candidate for membership. EU heads of government are expected to endorse that decision at a summit in Brussels on Thursday. Bosnia joins four other Western Balkan states: Montenegro, Serbia, the Republic of North Macedonia, and Albania, as well as Turkey, Moldova, and Ukraine in the queue for membership. Moldova and Ukraine's candidacies were confirmed in June. Um, Croatia is currently the only Western Balkan state that's an EU member. It's not yet a member of Schengen. It was recently greenlit to join the passport-free travel area in January. I mean, Turkey's not going to join. I mean, Turkey's not going to be allowed in, so I don't know why that's on this list. But certainly, I think Bosnia should would be good to have Bosnia join, and I'm sure lots of Europeans will take advantage of Croatia being in Schengen to spend their winter months there. It's lovely down there.
Yes,
Uh,
apparently it's lovely. I've not been, but yes, on our to do list. But yeah, candidate status is good, but it can still take quite a long time, can't it, to for that to translate into being full membership of the EU.
yes,
And I hope that in discussing membership, that a lot of emphasis is put not just on their economic stability, because I think too much can be put on that, because even some current member states have economies that are a bit dodgy. But I hope that a huge emphasis is put on human rights, and human rights status, and how they protect human rights, and the
sure,
human rights of
sure.
diverse groups, because as you said, Turkey is not yet anywhere near being um,
Not going to be allowed.
eligible,
They're
in
just
my view, for uh, for membership because of its really bad record on human rights.
Yeah, but I think you hit on a really important point earlier when you were saying that the migration statistics might be affected by the fact that all these old folk who normally go and spend like 10 years of their retirement in Spain can he do that now? And it's definitely an issue. I've got friends who my friend's husband I've got an Irish passport, and he's basically retired to Spain or to the Canaries, and she can only go there for 90 days every 120. So it's definitely an issue. I'm sure that's a factor. And Croatia will be very popular with your Northern Europeans, definitely in the winter months,
Yeah,
especially, which is a sort of something that we've really lost access to. Um, yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
But yeah, good luck, Bosnia. Um, so the next story is about the Oregon governor who's commuted the sentences of all the state's prisoners that are on death row. The governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, announced on Tuesday that she's commuting the sentences of all the state's 17 inmates awaiting execution, saying that all of their death sentences will be changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brown, who has less than a month remaining in office, said she was using her executive clemency powers to commute the sentences and that her order will take effect on Wednesday. I have long believed that justice is not advanced by taking a life, and the state should not be in the business of executing people, even if a terrible crime placed them in prison, Brown said in a statement. Oregon hasn't executed a prisoner since 1997. In Brown's first news conference after she became governor in 2015, the Democrat announced she would continue a moratorium on the death penalty imposed by her predecessor. So far, 17 people have been executed in the US in 2022 by lethal injection. Like Oregon, some other states are moving away from the death penalty. In California, Gavin Newsom, the Democrat governor, imposed a moratorium. And in Oregon, Brown's known for exercising clemency. So the Oregon Department of Corrections announced in May 2020 it was phasing out death row and reassigning those inmates to other special housing units. So that's some progress for Oregon.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we tend to think of the very and hear on our mainstream media of the very right wing states in the United States and what they're doing, whether it be on taking away women's abortion rights or justice issues, and of course the way that Trump um, filled the Supreme Court with very right wing traditionalists hasn't helped justice in the United States. So this is welcome news. But if people really look into the justice system in the United States, I mean, I just wouldn't go to the United States at the moment because you never know what's going to happen to you in the United States. And I'm a pretty law-abiding person, but the justice is pretty cruel in the United States. But this is a good news story because, having the death penalty hanging over you for not just
Yeah,
a wee while, but years and years must be an awful life sentence in itself. And at least if you know you've got a life that's going to
yeah,
continue, then you can start doing things to rehabilitate yourself, whether it be education or other forms of training or um, getting to reconnect with your families better, which we know is all um, if you believe in rehabilitation, then surely this is a move in the right direction.
yes. It reminds me of these terrible death penalties that are being meted out in Iran. It's been shocking that they're killing protesters in Iran. I mean, it is a brutal thing, the death penalty, no matter where it's exercised. And the Iranian government has been horrific as well, hasn't it? With what's
But
been going on
that's
there.
not after years. That's not after years of your lawyers pleading your case. That's just immediate justice, isn't it? In Iran, it's the same, but it's kind of different because it's immediate. There's no there's
Yeah.
no trying to
Linda's just
to
saying immediate injustice, which I think is
defeat the
about the
justice,
size of
to
it.
defeat the
Yeah,
justice, or defeat the what the judge has
yeah,
meted out. It's just immediate and got no recourse to challenging
no,
the
it's
court.
it's terrible. Yeah, I think that's it is good news about Oregon, and I think even though Scotland doesn't have the death penalty, I'm sure we have scope for prison reform. We still have more people on remand than any other country in Europe, and lots of women. It is terrible to think of. I remember the children's commissioner years ago wrote a report about the effect on children when women are jailed, and women are being jailed on remand. I suppose their children get taken away, and it is I think we're too quick to send people to jail. Really, there ought to be other approaches, and there is a bill going through the Scottish Parliament, I believe, at the moment, which will allow the courts to make more use of things like giving someone a sort of electronic tag which I think would be perfect. So that's fine as long as the person's got a sort of a home to live in, rather than put them on a remand, which costs the government a lot of money and is going to cause all kinds of disruption. That might be better. So yeah, we shouldn't be too complacent. Sure, there's
Yeah,
room
I
for
mean,
us
I
to
think
do.
COVID has increased the number of people on remand because obviously the court cases couldn't be heard. But you're right, the justice system and the judges and the sheriffs have all got a lot to answer for in so far as they always want to put people into jail while they're on remand rather, as you say, than tagging them. And we have got a long way to go in our justice system still.
Yes, I think presumably the sheriffs don't have the number of alternatives open to them that they would wish, because I'm sure that they have to, yeah. So I think creating other options for the sheriffs would be and advising them on having people in court who are advising them on the impact that this might have on people's children and so on, would be who haven't done anything. The children haven't done anything, so it's a shame if their welfare isn't taken into account. Um, so,
I mean,
uh,
the
so,
evidence,
so
yeah, the evidence is there in terms of those who are convicted who get community service orders are less likely to reoffend than those who are put to jail, where they're going to learn bad habits and not have the same uh, opportunities to have rehabilitation. So, yeah, if the opportunity is there for convicted offenders, then surely it should be there for people who are still waiting their court case.
yes, I think Linda was trying to say something there. I wasn't sure what it was. Um, so did you say there'll be a lot about something about independence? Oh, Women for Independence have done a lot of work on the
Mm.
situation that faces women. I think it's a lot of women are in jail essentially for non-payment of fines, because if you can't pay your fine, eventually you just end up in jail. So if you can't pay your television license, and then they to ask you to pay a certain amount of money, and you've got to choose between that and putting food on the table for your wains. If you choose food on the table, you just end up in jail eventually. That is the sanction.
Yeah,
Um,
that's horrific.
and things like COVID fines, people say your 15-year-old son gets out and broke a COVID rule, and you end up with a fine, which we know that the Westminster people were breaking those rules all the time. But if you're a mum and you can't pay it, you'll just end up in jail, because that's what happens if you don't pay your fines. So
Yep.
it's yeah, we've got a lot of work to do on that. Yeah. So electoral reform in Scotland. Expanding candidacy rights to 16 and 17-year-olds is one of a number of electoral reforms being considered in a consultation launched today. Following the lowering of the voting age to 16 in devolved Scottish elections, the consultation asks about changing the age of candidacy from the current minimum of 18 to allow young people to stand for election. Views are also being sought on how best to encourage all those eligible to register to vote, and underrepresented groups, to protect the privacy of candidates' addresses. I mean, that's interesting, but I mean, one of the things that I think we should really be focusing on is the new legislation that's been passed by Westminster on voter ID, because that is potentially going to really impact the number of people who can vote in the next general election. About 10% of people don't have a passport or a driving license. So, and there's lots. The UK doesn't have ID cards. Yeah, Scotland's sort of trying to enfranchise more people, but Scotland doesn't have any control over the general election rules. That's reserved. So actually, it could be very, very significant that the voter ID rules are coming in, and I don't think people are taking that seriously enough, because Scotland doesn't have ID cards. There's lots of evidence that it's quite difficult to get people to go and apply for a council voter ID form, and so it's going to be a problem. Definitely going to be a problem.
Yeah,
We need
yeah,
to sort of think about ways around it.
we discussed that very issue at our last constituency association meeting about the need to make sure that people have some form of ID. I mean, we need to make sure that the Young Scot card, for example, is taken as a form of ID, and that senior rail cards or senior concession cards are taken as a form of ID. I mean, I think they're called the National Entitlement Card now, so that should be eligible to be seen as a form of ID rather than just a driving license or a passport. But it's so alien to the way of British democracy that it just shows today with the call for evidence on electoral reforms how Scotland is diverging from the UK government, whereas the UK government is making it more and more difficult for people to take part in the democratic process. Scotland is enhancing and widening the
Yeah.
franchise, which it
Mm.
just shows you the widening gap in the way that we
Yeah.
think between the Scottish government and the Westminster government.
However, they could win that because that kind of voter suppression is the sort of thing that the Republicans do very successfully in the US, and the Republicans are good at that kind of nasty political rule shifting. And I think this is where the UK government is it only applies to UK elections, but that's important. If the next general election is going to be a de facto independence referendum, that's important. If 10% of people can't vote, that's important. And those 10% of people are not the kind of, are an important 10%. So it's really vital that we consider this. And, the government they are accepting, concession cuts for over 60s, and they are accepting the Scottish government's under 22 card, I think, which is great. So it's great the Scottish government has got that through. I think it's government issue cards, like they don't accept matriculation cards. So
Mm.
student matriculation cards aren't presumably because they're issued by the university. But I guess if universities could somehow work with the councils to have their cards recognised, then that could be helpful. But
I
yes,
mean, I
it's
think
it's a mass.
it's still it's still the notion that the Westminster election is the most important one, and turnout, as we know, is higher for Westminster elections than it is for Scottish government, Scottish Parliament, or council elections. But with this barrier put in the way of people, people might think that if that's the case, if they pitch up, and that's the case for Westminster elections, they might well think that that's the case for all elections and put them off voting even more.
It
So
will.
it's a very backward move.
It's very deeply humiliating for people to be turned away from the polling
Mm,
station. I
mm,
spoke to someone who that happened to. He was a gypsy, and he found it very humiliating. And I think it's going to be horrible for people because people won't they don't know about this. They,
mm.
they they don't know that this is the situation, and the UK has a very robust address-based system. It's not necessary, it's there is very little fraud, but I just don't
Yeah,
think this subject is getting enough attention because yeah, we
no,
want to avoid people being turned away from the polling booth because they might never come back.
absolutely.
Um, so winter vaccines. Those eligible for the free COVID-19 and flu vaccinations are being urged to get their jabs as winter sets in and hospitalisations increase. The reminder comes as Public Health Scotland data shows in the week ending 11th December 22, there were on average 735 patients in hospital with COVID. That's an 18% increase from the previous week. Admissions from flu are also on the rise, with the highest hospital admission rates noted in patients aged less than 1 year old. Parents and carers are encouraged to get their children vaccinated as soon as possible. The flu vaccine for children is a painless nasal spray. Vaccines are safe, effective, and offer the best protection to those most at risk for serious illness. Adults over 50 are entitled to get both free vaccines. Have you had your vaccines, Maureen?
Yes, I've had both my flu and my booster vaccine, but you know, COVID is absolutely still about. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and afterwards I heard of at least 5 people who went down with COVID
Mm.
thereafter. So, I mean, given the pressures on our NHS post COVID and, winter pressures as well. Today we've got lots of snow. There'll be people who've slipped and fallen and broken their legs or their hips or their knees. Um, so all that adds pressure to our accident and emergency. And I just find it, rather sad that people don't take vaccines and are prepared to add to the burden on our nurses and doctors just for the simple reason of not taking a vaccine and being more liable if they catch flu or COVID to be more ill and end up in hospital. I think that's unforgivable in my book, to be honest.
Yes, I mean, we have had a very sort of good vaccine take-up, haven't we, I think, in Scotland?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, you know, everyone, lots of people are going to get them, and everyone has got friends who haven't got them.
Yeah, we have very good
Anyway,
take up rates in Scotland. Yeah.
yeah. So, the next one, the Scottish Government Hydrogen Action Plan. Gosh, I just heard a crack. Something fell off. A pathway to help make Scotland, probably a big lump of ice. A pathway to help make Scotland a world leader in hydrogen production has been published. The Hydrogen Action Plan sets out steps to help the emerging hydrogen sector in Scotland achieve an ambition of 5 gigawatts of renewable and low carbon hydrogen, equivalent to a sixth of Scotland's energy needs by 2030. Also reaffirms an ambition to produce 25 gigawatts by 2045, with a hydrogen economy potentially supporting more than 300,000 jobs. Capitalising on the potential for Scotland to become a leading exporter of hydrogen is estimated to contribute between 5 billion and 25 billion in a year by 2045. The Scottish Government is making available 100 million to support the action plan, including a 90 million green hydrogen fund. And the Net Zero and Energy Secretary Michael Matheson said, hydrogen could present Scotland's greatest industrial opportunity since oil and gas was discovered in the North Sea. This technology has tremendous potential. Um, so this hydrogen action plan sounds very ambitious.
Yes, it's actually something that I really would like to read before I retired from Parliament. It certainly was something that was on the agenda and something that people who were interested in it came to speak to MSPs about. I mean, there's huge potential for our trades, for example, to run on hydrogen, and there's already an organisation here in Aberdeen called Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group who are setting up hydrogen stations throughout the northeast and the Highlands. So it has huge potential. And our new harbour in Aberdeen is also somewhere where I hope it becomes a hydrogen hub rather than a wind turbine hub. But there is lots of scope. I mean, I know that, for example, Germany is very keen on getting its hands on Scotland's hydrogen, according to Renewable Energy Scotland. So it is important that we have this action plan so that Scotland benefits from its renewable energy and it's not the windfalls from it are not exported elsewhere, because it is like another oil and gas bonanza, and it needs to be handled properly for the benefit of Scots.
Interesting. Yes, I think that's what everybody wants from the renewable sector. We obviously need to find a way forward where we have got the potential to meet the ambitious targets that we've set in terms of moving to net zero. And it's very challenging. Perhaps all of these huge scientific advances are they're challenging to make them work in practice. But this sounds good. It sounds like they're kind of moving forward with that. Um, and there's just one more story. Did you say something, Linda? There's just one more story that we've got on the list, which is that the Scottish Government announces biodiversity funding at COP15. which is COP15 is the kind of biosphere COP. Projects to restore rivers in the Cairngorms and protect the rainforest in Argyll are among the initiatives that will share 7.6 million through the latest round of the Scottish Government's Nature Restoration Fund. This round is focused on supporting large-scale projects, including multi-year projects that run up to 2026. For the first time, it also includes development funding to help organisations bring big restoration projects to the point of delivery. The £65 million fund was a key part of the Butte House Agreement, and multi-year funding was announced at Non-Nature Day at COP26. Lorna Slater, the Green Biodiversity Minister, said it's the largest ever fund. We've already invested over 20 million. It's having a real impact across Scotland, restoring rivers and floodplains, regenerating our forests and recovering our wildlife population. So that's a good news story to end on.
Absolutely. A good news story. I mean, we keep talking about climate change and our need to invest in renewables, but at the same time, we should never forget that certain species of our plant life and animal and insect life is under threat because of the changing climate. And it's important. We spent a lot of money on restoring our peatlands, and restoring wetlands is just as important, whether it be round rivers or in our forests. And Glenmore and the Cairngorms is a huge tourist attraction, and it's because of the wildlife and the diversity of plant life that you can see there that makes it such an interesting place to visit.
Yeah, and I think we can also integrate renewables into that. Like Strathnairg is very beautiful, where they have wind turbines. You can't see them from the road; you have to hike up the mountain to see them. But they're integrated with peat bog restoration and with hydro, and I think they can very much be part of that beautiful natural landscape, and also at the same time help us to avoid burning fossil fuels.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you very much. I think that's it for this evening. So, thanks very much, Maureen, for your interesting and insightful contribution. And before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to deploy staff to make more programmes. Good night, and thank you for watching.